Hello and welcome to this video where I am joined by HR and business consultant Rebecca Beard from Peas in a Pod Consulting. Welcome.
Hi.
So
Good
this
to
is
see you
pretty
today.
exciting. Thank you very much. And this is pretty exciting for us technical geeks because, like me, you're a bit of a tech geek in a different type industry. And there's a lot of conjecture and discussion online at the moment with regards to this furloughing of workers. And I want to use little bunny ears because it's a term that is not something that we commonly hear. So I suppose we could start with that. So the discussion I want to have is around, if you're an employer right now, you've heard that the government have got an 80% guarantee against workers in this furlough position. But I think we ought to start with what is furlough and where has this word come from? So give us a bit of insight into that.
Okay, so it's interesting because furlough isn't really a common term that's used in UK employment law. It's a term that's much more common in the US, I believe. But in the sense of for the purposes of what's going on at the moment, when the government talk about putting a staff member or an employee on furloughed leave, they effectively mean, in layman's terms, a temporary leave of absence. So in this scenario, that would be because either an employee's place of work has closed down, or there's been a downturn in the business as a result of what's going on in the world at the moment, and therefore that there isn't enough work. Or there's no longer any work that employee can do for at least the short term moving forwards. So the term furloughed leave effectively means putting them on a temporary leave of absence whilst we get through this period. Yeah,
and I think that's been something that's been up for debate because I think a lot of people have instantly gone, oh, well, I'm just going to furlough all my staff and cool, I can get 80%. So talk me through, if you furlough a worker, what's their status? What should they or shouldn't they be doing right now?
Okay, so a furloughed worker is still effectively employed by you, and you're right. The government have introduced this scheme genuinely to avoid employers having to make employees redundant, or lay them off. The layoffs are much less common than redundancies. And the whole purpose of the scheme is to give employers the funding they need to be able to give employees that stability for the future in terms of continuation of employment. I know that the salary is going to be covered to some degree throughout this difficult time. I think it's worth noting that this should be an end solution. So I think the government are expecting employers to look at any other alternative way of being able to maintain that employment relationship throughout this period. And I guess the big thing is, as we know, you can see I'm here, is home working. That's what the government are looking for employers to do, find alternative ways that employees can continue to work in some sense. And I think if you take this away from a HR perspective, that's really important from somebody's well-being and mental health perspective as well. Keeping people having a sense of purpose and a focus throughout this period, I think, is actually really important for people's well-being. So I think that there's a much wider agenda as part of this as well.
Yeah, and should they be working? So if one of my clients says to me, oh, I'm going to furlough all my workers, but they're still going to be on the end of the phone doing stuff, is that a thing that we're allowed to do?
No. I think the government have made very clear that trying to profiteer in a situation of a national crisis will not be looked favourably upon, and I think there will probably be heavy penalties in place. How well that can be controlled, or the levels of enforcement available, who the hell knows? But the rule is, if a staff member has been identified as being furloughed, it is because there is no work for them to do. And that's obviously clear-cut in scenarios such as restaurants and pubs and hospitality and leisure, where businesses have completely closed down. It's not so clear-cut in industries such as ours, where, for example, your team are working from home. There may well be a slight downturn in work for them to do, but there is still work available and the business is still running in some capacity. So it's really important that the employer understands the rules about furloughed leave, because I think there will be penalties in place if they're breached.
Yeah, it's certainly the way we've been looking at it. I mean, having been involved with PAYE compliance visits from HMRC over the years, rightly so, they do look at these kind of things, and I think it'll be interesting to see. And I think obviously we're encouraging clients to do the right thing and only use this where they need to. Because as you say, I think the problem with it at the moment is it was announced as 80% guaranteed wages, and everyone thought, brilliant, that's me saved. But as we can discuss, it's not as good as that. Mainly because if they're still carrying out work for them, you've still got to pay them, you've still got to fund them, and regardless actually of whether they're furloughed or not, you've still got to fund them for at least a temporary period, and that's been one of the biggest challenges we've seen. But if they are doing work for you, it's no different. You have to look for loans. Obviously there's this CIBIL, as they're calling it, this interruption loan, which is quite difficult to get in these early stages as we're recording this. So there are a few options to do it, but yeah, you've still got to fund them, and as a result we've got employers scrambling around to manage their cash to do this. But it's not right in every scenario either, as we'll discuss, I'm sure. So, but right now, so we're clear, employees obviously shouldn't be doing any work right now if they're furloughed.
No, this is a scenario where this should only come down to if an employee is at risk of redundancy, then they should be furloughed as a way of avoiding that redundancy occurring. I think it's interesting what you raised there, because I've read a number of different things recently, and it's important to note that at this point we're all just speculating in terms of different scenarios. You've got the situation where you've got people that have already been made redundant, and one of the main questions is, do they have a right to be reinstated if they are prepared to be put on furloughed leave? And that question becomes even more complicated when these staff members have already received a redundancy payment or have been paid in lieu of notice. Then you've got the long-term question of, will they have the right to claim unfair redundancy? Then you've got the other scenario where you've got the employer, like you said, who wants to furlough their staff and pay them a wage through using the government funding, but they have no idea when that government funding is going to come in. And let's be honest, we all know HMRC don't work very quickly. So how much obligation is there on them to continue to try and find money that isn't there to pay wages on the expectation that at some point down the line, God knows when that will be, but it will be reimbursed? And will there be an expectation that they take out a loan to make that happen, to avoid those redundancies, to avoid risking a claim of unfair redundancy in that scenario? It's all a complete minefield.
Yeah.
We have no idea what's going to happen.
No, we don't. And I think the answer currently is, if on the limited guidance is out there, is yeah, you're required to fund it and you've got to try and do that. But I have seen several people, the realism is on Facebook groups and businesses I've been talking to, the realism is they won't have the cash. But what they are doing is trying to process it so that then when the claim can come, they can then pass that money back to the employees. But at the moment, all we know is it's going to be an online portal. And this is at the time of recording, we should say this is changing like daily at the minute. We've got a blog, associates.co.uk/COVID-19 that's been updated almost hourly at points with new news that comes through. And at the minute, the only thing we know is it's going to be a portal. Looking at how they've done it with business rate funding for those businesses that are going to get these grants, the money's only appearing in the local authorities bank on the 1st, and then they've got all the admin to go with it to get it out to people. So you think you're probably not likely to see that. I spoke to some people in the know who are very good on the lending front, and they're saying those things aren't expected to at least the end of April. HMRC have got to design a portal, an IT portal from the ground up and get that released. And they haven't got the best track record with projects when they've got long time stands. So yeah, I'm a bit fearful for the amount of time that it's going to take, but it is going to come. But as you said, it should be used in the last resort, really, anyway, or where it's sensible. From as a business owner myself, I just see it as something, like you say, if it's clear cut and you can stand people down because they're physically no work, then it's a great thing to be able to do for them to avoid them just having no money and going off home. So I think it's a fantastic measure. It's just getting that money in. And from a technical point, you just discussed, it's very difficult. So you and I can probably chat about this till the cows come home. But director, for example, do you think it's possible to furlough a director?
Well, again, that's the $1 million question. I think that's probably one of the most Googled questions in the last week. And again, there's lots of speculation around it. But from what I've read, the current guidance seems to be that directors will be able to be furloughed. However, again, the question has to be asked, unless a business completely closes down, there is always work for a director to do, even if it's not income generating. So how can how can, in real terms, a director actually be furloughed? But on the basis that, let's hope, fingers crossed, because let's be honest, we are directors ourselves, in the situation that a director can be furloughed and that's allowable by the government, how will their wages, how will their 80% wages be worked out? Because if that's worked out based on their actual pay as you earn, we all know that we're all smart enough to obviously pay that at quite a minimal rate. So 80% of that amount is not going to amount to very much. Will there be the option instead to claim it as a self-employed person and therefore claim it on the basis of dividends? Again, we don't know whether you can pick or choose. What about the directors, if it's down to pay as you earn? What about the directors that only pay themselves in dividends because they're not employees of their own company? So there's so many unknowns right now, but fingers crossed, from what I've read, it seems to be that directors will be eligible for the furloughed leave scheme. It's just how it will work is anyone's guess at the moment.
Yeah, I'm still sitting on the fence on this one. I'm dubious. I see some very well-known HR people saying that it's definitely possible, but like you, I see that if the status is you can't carry out any work, well, as a director, you've got responsibilities under the Companies Act that you can't just let go. And what I find quite funny about it is directors normally spend their life saying, look, I'm not under a contract of employment, so minimum wages, auto enrolment and all the rest of it don't apply to me, and then suddenly everyone wants to be employed, so that we've got this furlough option. So yeah, very much waiting to see, because it's complete conjecture at this point, but certainly I don't think an exact answer, and I have seen exact answers being given, and just for the reasons you've just said, I don't think we can give one until we see what they come out with. And that's the secondary point for a lot of people in the situation we're talking about is I saw it in the draft legislation actually for the self-employed support. It mentioned self-employed people and freelancers. Well, 9 out of 10 freelancers I know are limited companies. And there is this problem in UK law where, from a tax perspective, we've got limited company directors that are effectively employed in the tax as an employee with maybe some investment income in terms of the dividends. So it doesn't really sit with that furlough 80% system, but they're also not self-employed as a self-employed person would be with income, trading income and things like that. So it's an absolute minefield, and I'm looking forward to tonight's announcement to get our teeth into what that might look like, really.
We'll have to ring and have a chat later about it.
Yeah, it is a tough one. So at the moment, if I've got a room full of people and I've decided, look, that is right, they are furloughed, this is going to be the case, what do I need to be telling them?
Okay, so in that situation, I think it's worth stating at this point that furloughed leave, from what I can understand, can be flexed up in a sense that it could be rotated. So you have scenarios where, I don't know, you have a nursery with 10 childcare assistants. That's really quite a simple case of all 10 childcare assistants who all perform the same role need to be furloughed. Then you've got a scenario like a marketing company, and in that marketing company you've got a software developer, you've got an office manager, you've got an admin assistant, and a fourth role, and they all play a different part within the company. And some of those roles are still necessary, and some of that work still needs to continue. And for some of the roles, the other two roles perhaps they're not. And it's really important that when you're making decisions about furlough, that you base the decisions as to who you furlough on very objective, fair selection criteria, which can be just about meeting the business needs. So like I said, if everybody does the same role, then everyone's furloughed. Or you could have a scenario where you rotate furlough. So you could, if you've got a team of 8, you could put 4 of them on furlough for a month, and then you could bring them back, and then you could put the other 4 on furlough for a month to rotate it and make it fair. I think it's really important at this point that employee engagement and motivation levels are taken into account, and trying to find the best solution in terms of using furlough in a way that not only meets the business needs and takes into account the roles and what everybody's doing and whether that work is still necessary, but also takes into account what's fair for staff and what's going to keep them engaged and motivated to want to keep working if they're one of the ones that are selected to continue working. So it's again, there's a number of considerations with it, but it's not necessarily as black and white as you'd want it to be, but it also means that there is some flexibility there to be able to use furlough to meet your reducing business needs or the specific scenario within your workforce.
Yeah. And in terms of technical things that we need to do we need to then, do we have to reissue contracts of employment or write to them? I mean, what's the best practice?
Yeah, absolutely. This is probably the key thing. The amount of clients I've spoken to in the last 2 weeks that have said, yeah, I've just furloughed all my staff, as though they have a legal right to do that. Putting a staff, changing a staff's an employee status to furloughed is changing their terms and conditions. You're changing the status of their employment contract. Most of the time, you'll be reducing their pay as well to the 80%. And to do that, to change to vary an employee's contract terms, you have to do so with their consent. So this should very much be a process in collaboration with the employee, where you sit down and talk to them as an employer about the downturn in business as a result of what's going on, and how that's impacted on their role. And you explain quite clearly that you want to put them on furloughed leave as a solution to avoid a potential redundancy scenario. Now, I haven't kind of come across one employee in this scenario that hasn't agreed to it, for really obvious reasons, and the alternative is not preferable. So it's not hard to get an employee's consent, but I think it's going to be necessary, and I think HMRC are going to want to see that communication in writing with that employee's agreement to be submitted as part of this portal when employers are making a claim for these funds. So I think it's really important that you carry out a paperwork process with every employee that you do put on furloughed leave. And I can help with that if anyone has any specific questions or needs.
I think that was the biggest thing for me talking to businesses. As you can imagine, in the role we do, I've done nothing but, apart from the times where I'm in front of these cameras, is talking to clients and their needs. And that's the number one thing I hear is, oh, I've furloughed them. Cool, what have you done about it? Well, nothing, I just told them, they've all gone home. It's like, okay, right, well, we've got more important things as employers to be doing to make sure that everyone's happy with that. So that's a really key bit of information, I think, for sure. And even if HMRC, because of speed to market, don't end up needing you to upload these extra details, I think undoubtedly there'll be a compliance aspect that means that if they look at your PAYE, they're going to want to see those documents the same way as they would with any other compliance. It's record keeping, isn't it? So.
Yeah, and not only record keeping, it's protecting you from legal risk from an employment law perspective as well. If you don't have that record to confirm that an employee has agreed to have their contract terms varied, then you're risking potential claims in the future for unlawful deduction of wages, constructive dismissal. It's not worth the risk for what is a relatively simple paperwork process. Have it to reflect the conversations that you've probably already have with these employees. So yeah, definitely do it.
And and have you seen in your initial conversations with employees over the last sort of few days, employers and employees, any particular quirks or risks and things situations where you'd like, actually, you really want to consider this while you're furloughed, like bonuses or anything like that?
I haven't. I think that I've had some questions, some very specific questions, which is I haven't been able to answer at this point, around different types of workers. So 0 hours contract workers, they're an interesting one, whether they are going to fall under the eligibility criteria for the scheme or not. And if they do, what pay referencing period will be used to work out what their salary should be. Also, another one, a worker who has two employments, one they've been furloughed from and one where they're still working, and whether they will be eligible for furlough leave payments. So not so much real challenges other than what I've stated before about making sure a paperwork process is carried out, but just some really specific questions about different specific scenarios within their workplaces and how they handle them. And I just, like I said, until we get further guidance, everybody is speculating right now. Even the question about 0 hours contract workers and whether they're eligible or not. I've read 2 fact sheets from HR consultants that say they are, and I've read another 2 fact sheets from another 2 HR consultancy companies that say they're not. No one knows. Everyone's just speculating. And that's problematic, because those types of workers and those types of situations within workplaces are real. And when employers don't have the answers to be able to put preparations in place, it means that they're inherently going to have to work quite reactively. And that's when obviously problems occur and the workplace is destabilised, which is given everything else that's going on in this world right now, we don't need any more destabilisation.
No, and I think that's been the key. As you know, as a person with a team of 17 myself, the disruption around can you get everyone working remotely? Is everybody okay? Mental health, The last thing you want to be thinking about is where's the money coming from? Am I protecting myself? Do I need to? There's a lot of things to do other than just say. And I think that's why we've seen a lot of businesses go, yeah, you're furloughed, blah 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 blah, because it's just an easier thing to do. And then you and I were talking about it earlier about the lack of information. It's the same with the costs. So they said 80%. The technical details still missing, but we have seen information from people who've been able to speak to some of the people behind the scenes at HMRC that it looks like the 80% of wages, or the 2,500 cap, includes other employment costs. So for the actual employee, it might not be as attractive as it sounds, because it's not 80% of your gross wages, it's 80% of the total cost. That includes your pension contributions you might be being made by your employer, and also the employer's national insurance they're having to pay, which isn't something that normally goes in your pocket. So yeah, it's not as great as that seems either.
No, you're absolutely right. Even just talking to you previously, I didn't know at that point whether the £2,500 cap, it's whether the £2,500 is the 80%, or whether it's 80% of the 2,500. Even that wasn't clear to me before I spoke to you half an hour before this call. So it's a nightmare at the moment.
Yeah, it is. So I suppose that to give employers an action point on this, is there anything particular we'll sum up in a minute in terms of action points, but is there anything else around this issue that you wanted employers to be aware of right now?
Not really, other than just take with a pinch of salt everything you read, because there is very limited factual information being released from the government about this scheme at this point. So everything they're reading on social media is all speculation. It's all somebody's opinion, and don't rely on what you're reading until the actual guidance comes out. And like you've said, we're trying to keep it at the forefront of that, to release that information as soon as it does. That's probably the best advice I can give to an employer. And also work on the worst case scenario. Like you said, even with the salaries, work on the basis that £2,500 includes all of those additional on costs. That's probably as much as I would say at this point, on the basis that we actually don't have that much information to go on.
No, brilliant. Well, I think this has been a really good thing, just hopefully to open people's eyes to the fact that it's not as simple as the internet's making out with the terms of what's going on. And I know personally, there's only so much time I can spend away from my clients to try and sort of bring people up to speed online. This is why we've been trying in the small periods we have had a break, just to do these kind of things, to get out to as many people as we can. But it isn't as simple as it seems. There is a lack of information, technical guidance, so professionals can guide you in the right way. But I think this is a good discussion about where we are right now. And I'm sure if we do get some more detail in the coming days, as I'm sure we will, we can have another chat and pass that on to some specifics. But that's brilliant. So Becky, thanks very much for joining us. It's been awesome to have you on. I appreciate you and everyone else that's trying to balance working from home at the moment. So thanks very much. And hopefully,
thanks for having me.
So I'm sure we'll see you again soon on another video.